This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the mind of business leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
I was told by many people that I'm quite effective in inspiring others to reach their full potential. But to me, the attribute that I believe helped me the most to achieve what I have achieved so far, and I'm not done yet, is courage. I've always had the courage, respectfully, professionally, to call a spade a spade. Didn't always work. Sometimes it ends up meaning that you're not invited to the next meeting because you're challenging status quo. You're asking too many challenging questions that they don't want to discuss at that moment in time. But having the courage to be honest with who you are, to remain true to yourself, and bring your full self in every engagement, I think it would be the superpower. It's having the courage to say what you really, truly think.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. Milos Topic, VP for IT and Chief Digital Officer at Grand Valley State University. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets podcast.
Thank you for having me, David.
Now, first off, what can you tell us about Grand Valley State and about your role there?
Absolutely. Grand Valley State is a hidden gem in West Michigan. We are in Allendale, Grand Rapids, as well as a few other centers across the state, including Detroit. About 23,000 students, 4,000 employees, faculty, and staff. It's a fairly young university. It was founded in 1960 by the community. So members of this community wanted a university in their place, which is not often the case across the nation. Sometimes colleges move into places and become college towns, which create other issues. We were fortunate to have a community that was welcoming and really wanted us here. I've joined Grand Valley State in August of 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic. I pulled off a Houdini move, as a friend of mine used to refer to it. Came from East Coast. I spent over 20 years in Jersey and New York, and my role has two primary functions. One is to lead the IT organization, which is more commonly referred to as that role of a CIO, Chief Information Officer. And then the second one, which is the one that also really I find more intriguing and exciting on a daily basis, that is to partner with university president and other leaders and members of our community to hopefully find a way to reimagine the future of higher education. We have a lot of amazing things that we do really, really well. And I'm sure we also have some opportunities along the way to maybe make some things a bit more contemporary and a little bit more relevant based on the year we actually live in.
Great setup there. And I'm really interested in the reimagining the future of higher education. And the future is very, well, I say the future, actually what for many years we've thought of as the future, which is actually kind of the present right now, is what I want to talk about. And to help frame our conversation today, Milos, there's rhetoric that is quite pervasive at the moment about how automation technology, the role that plays in sparking growth, in rejuvenating organizations, about how AI will transform companies' products, processes, productivity, all of that great stuff. There's lots of that talk going on at the moment, from everyone from senior leadership to vendors to government administrations, in fact, all around the world. But this is what I want to explore with you. In this context of technology as a catalyst, as an enabler, AI as this change agent, is it not natural that we run the risk of the human workforce feeling disempowered, undervalued, ultimately disengaged? And for you, as a leader of people in the technology space, how do you feel about this, perhaps a shift in dynamics?
Absolutely. Great question. Great observations. So this is nothing new. If you go back over the last, I'm not going to date myself, but more than 25 years of doing this professionally, there were other, again, nothing quite as transformative with as large of an impact as artificial intelligence. But I'll get to that in a second. But there were other things that disrupted what we did and how we did it. And then we moved forward, we adjusted. Humans, people, are incredibly resilient. We Most of us do not like change. So we drive to work the same way. We hit the same pothole, especially when I was in Jersey. You hit the same pothole every morning. You go, I know that thing was there, but I hit it every morning anyway because I had to make that turn. When I come home at night, there's a favorite spot on the couch where I like to sit. Don't ask me why. We all have them. There's a favorite mug from which we drink our tea or coffee every morning. So we're creatures of habit. So it's not natural for most to keep up with the pace of change. But that AI genie has left the bottle. It's not going back in. So what we need to do is embrace it and figure out a way of how does it supplement and complement our abilities instead of looking at it as a adversary, as a competitor, as a threat. Yes, certain things we do as people today will change and will go away. It will be replaced. It will be automated. However, new things will come in. There's so much that individuals and people can contribute that is uniquely human, from empathy to understanding to collaboration to the ability to inspire and lead and motivate people to go beyond their self-imposed limitations, to be able to negotiate, to sell. There was a study that was published. It was conducted by a gentleman whose name escapes me right now, but it was published by the Carnegie Foundation over 100 years ago in 1918. And they said back then, which rings true today in 2025, is that 85% of one's professional and financial success depends on their ability to lead, speak, sell, inspire, motivate, negotiate. Only 15 is hard-coded set of skills because they keep changing every year or every few years, maybe in some industries every decade. So absolutely, the change is here. The change is coming. Some people will find a way of how do they swim amongst those currents, and others maybe, even only temporarily, they may be swept away by those currents. So you got to figure out a way of how do you leverage that tool and technology and anything else that comes in. How about quantum computing down the road? Whatever comes in, how do you make it work for you to expand your toolkit and your arsenal of capabilities as opposed to digging your heels in and fighting it? Because in that battle, long term, you're going to lose.
And I think that's the challenge, the conflict. And you mentioned it there as you spoke about we are creatures of habit and we spend a good part of our lives forming those habits. But then when change comes along, it is difficult sometimes for many of us to adapt. And there are sometimes the habits that we don't even realize that we've formed. And it's only when something challenges those that we're forced to face up to them. Let's come on to the workforce part there. As you say, job roles are changing. I look back to previous revolutions or kind of inflection points. I think back 25 years ago when search engines became a real thing and the number of businesses that, yes, were disrupted, but also created, number of job roles that were created purely to sit on top of search engines. It's been really transformative in the last 2.5 decades. But in terms of the workforce, there are lots of ways for many types of workforce, many industries, that these are uncertain times. So how do you go about preparing your teams for what is happening right now and for what might be happening next for them?
Absolutely. It's kind of the principles or kind of the core tenets of change management on steroids, if you will. So you have to acknowledge the situation we're in. You have to acknowledge people's perceptions, their feelings, their experiences. And then you have a conversation and you go and say, hey, here's where we are. Here's where we were in the past. At some point, someone right before Model T rolled off the assembly lines, bought 1,000 horses. That person lost. When tractors came onto our fields and farms, there was all kinds of uprising of what it's going to do to the little man and the farmers and everybody else. And now everybody uses it because of its scale and impact that it can provide. So takes time for things to adjust. It's important to acknowledge people's thoughts, ideas, and perceptions and experiences. It is also very important to have honest, candorous conversations of what the potential are and what are our paths forward. We can stay the course as is, and that potentially could leave us down the path of obsolescence as a company, as a business, as a university. because others are innovating, others are leading, others are making their businesses and their services and their course offerings more contemporary and relevant to the culture and new generations that are yet to come. I can always, like, I've lived in different parts of the world, and I've experienced to a degree that story of, I walked uphill twice, both directions in snow, 3 miles. Great, cool. Our kids don't have to do that. What about their kids? What about their grandkids down the road? And we always have to think ahead of the moment in time we're in if we want to be relevant. It's all about technology is meant to do, from my perspective, in the simplest of ways, and I'm really oversimplifying this, but it's really meant to do two things. One is increase flexibility. So you used to be limited. You need to be able to access to that particular software application. There's one lab on campus with 30 seats. You got to drive and park and get there and hope that it's available. And if it's not, you wait or you try to reserve it and so forth. We no longer do that. We can now virtualize those applications. You can get them on any device anywhere, right? So increasing flexibility and access. Two is reducing friction. I used to play a lot of competitive sports when I was younger and, a couple of healthier knees ago and probably 20 pounds ago. And at the end of a competitive game between two teams, if no one talked about the referees, they did a good job. And unless you really are a tech company, no one should be talking about the tools and technologies that you're putting in because they're meant to be enablers. They're meant to scale people. They're meant to be able to provide them tools and resources and save time, introduce efficiencies, and maybe some new creative endeavors that they couldn't do without them. So on that journey, you have to demonstrate small wins. It has to be about them, not about you. One of the things that I realized in my career, I've sometimes struggled, like we communicated something, whether it's an email or a website update or whatever, and then, 3 weeks later, you're still running into dozens of people who have no clue that took place. And you go, how is that possible? We told you. But what I've realized years ago, change happens at the pace of the listener, not the communicator. That's why you have to understand that people process information differently. Sometimes you send the same message in a variety of different ways. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a Slack message, maybe it's on Zoom, maybe it's a social media post, maybe it's a carrier pigeon, right? You do it in a variety of ways, and then all of a sudden one of them resonates and you go, aha, they got it. So it's about constant communication built on trust and transparency and sincerity, acknowledging their perspectives, incorporating them wherever it's possible and wherever it makes sense, but being honest that we have to change certain things. And here's why we have to change them. So people have to understand why. They have to understand how we're going to change them. And they have to understand their role, their place. We've had a number of enterprise initiatives at Grand Valley, and I've had my own colleagues, my own teammates in IT, some of them, who are not directly involved in those enterprise initiatives and go, I feel like my work doesn't matter. And I say, tell me more. Well, I'm not involved in that major, ERP implementation. I go, but yes, you are. But no, I'm not. I'm not the one coding it. I'm not the one deploying X, Y, and Z. I go, yeah, but do you understand that all of that's sitting on this layer, and this is the layer that you run? And if this layer is not really in tip-top shape, nothing above it that we build matters. That penthouse, it's useless and it's irrelevant if the foundation is built in sand.
Hmm.
So you got to find a way for them to see their place on that journey and understand that we move forward. On that journey, you're going to have some people who refuse to come along. And then those are different kinds of conversations that you as a leader have to have.
I think there's a lot of reflection in this AI wave that we've been on for the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, particularly the Gen AI driven part of the wave. And it's a bit of self-reflection on the role of humans. Some of the things that we have traditionally seen as the preserve of humanity, for example, creativity, all of a sudden that is being challenged by generative AI. Now, I'm not suggesting that Gen AI is the same as human creativity, but I've heard a lot of very compelling arguments that suggest they're closer than we might altogether feel comfortable with. But on a much broader basis, it is about understanding whether it's a corporate machine whether it is in culture or society, where humans excel, where their role is. And I think that speaks to your point about in a workforce, as a leader in a workforce, you need to help your humans, your teams understand where they fit. What is your experience of approaching conversations with staff who, for whatever reason, are hesitant, reluctant, resistant to this technological change, whether it's AI or whether it's transformation more generally?
Yep. People matter the most, and we should all focus on them first. Nothing else, everything else is a tool. Like I always twitch when somebody, when you're doing resource dependencies, across major enterprise initiatives across a variety of functional areas and divisions and go, well, let's look at our resource dependencies. And they call people resources. They're not resources,
Yeah.
right? They're people.
Yeah.
Everything else, the tools, technologies, and hardware, software, those are resources. Funding, money, availability, that's resources. People are people. So you have to have conversations to understand. So you first of all, you acknowledge them and you say, look, I hear you. You're absolutely right. And you have every right to feel this way. We get it. Let me help you understand. Talk to me about the challenges that you're experiencing every day. Where are some of the frustrations? Where are some of and we can do it small. Where are some of the repetitive tasks where you have to turn that screw 17 times every hour? Do you really want to do that? Like at your core, like, are you really excited to come in and turn that screw 17 times every hour, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 52? Let's just say you took a couple of weeks off for vacation, 50 or 49 weeks a year. And most people, if they really take a moment to be a little bit of a self-reflective and with a little bit of introspection, will say, no, absolutely not. Who wants to turn the same screw 17 times every hour? And we go, perfect, wonderful. Let me show you that it's not an equal a game of a finite thinking where there's one pie, we can bake another pie. Meaning, why don't we use some of these tools and technologies to help you move away from those redundant, repetitive, mind-numbing tasks? We can start there, right? Those are the easiest ones to sell and for people to relate to. What often happens, the reason why people are resistant, they think if I turn the screw 17 times an hour and I no longer do that, I'm out of a job. And what you do, you go and say, no, you're just going to do a different job. You're going to do the one that's more important. We really want to bring you closer to the core mission purpose of our environment. For us at a university, it's education, it's students. That's why we're here. If you're selling a product or a widget or a service, it's development of that product or service. You really want people to be closer to the core nucleus of the reason your business and company exists. And if your business and company exists only to make money, you're not going to exist for a long time. People, especially in today's world, need to connect something that's bigger than themselves. A mission, a vision, a set of values that they believe that drives them. Because if you're only competing on price, it's often race to the bottom. If you're only competing on what can you pay someone in a bonus structure that you can give them at Christmas, somebody else somewhere can always pay more. So you got to differentiate yourself as to why do you exist and how do you do things. And that's where people go. I do believe, now also, there are levels of creativity. Some people are remarkably creative, can think on their feet, no matter what you throw them. They go, absolutely, boom, here's what I'm thinking. Because they're working real time based on their experiences. They're wired that way. Others are not as good because they have different skill sets. Maybe they're more pragmatists. Maybe they need 3 to 5 to 7 days to reflect on questions you just posed so they can really process them. There's no right answer, but you just align people to the functions and roles where they're best suited. A lot of the AI tools that I use as someone to bounce ideas off of. When I write an article, I'm writing a book right now, and I have the structure of these chapters and components within each of the chapters. And I went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, I'm thinking about this, and this in this chapter on this topic. What am I missing? And it came back with 2 other things. They're like, hey, great thoughts, great ideas. Have you also thought about X and Y? And I go, oh my God, what a great addition. I'm still going to write them. But the fact that it made me think about something that I missed, I find very helpful. So the best thing for people to feel more comfortable is to get their hands on this experience, test them, understand that you're going to break some things, That's okay. Listen, learn, adjust, do, iterate, and keep doing it again.
And what you've actually led on to a question that I really wanted to ask there, about leadership, about how technology, maybe about how automation technology, AI is helping you in a leadership position. But before we get there, I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things that you said. People are people, not resources. Hallelujah, brother. I have hated being called a resource in the past. I find it the most dehumanizing, kind of disengaging piece of rhetoric to be described as a resource. And also your point on finding the why. It is such a moment of clarity, not only when you find the why as a workforce within an organization, as an employee within the organization, but also as a leadership, being able to articulate that why. The point that you made about change happening at the speed at which people listen, not necessarily at which you communicate it. When people actually get on board with that why, once you've been able to find it, then that really does help many periods of transition change and getting everyone to back the same horse there. Coming back to leadership, though, you mentioned about using AI there, for example, to help you bounce ideas, to progress yourself there. Are there any other ways in which, as a leader, as a CIO, for example, as a CTO within an organization like Grand Valley State, that you find technology really helping you to work with the humans that you are leading?
Absolutely. So there's kind of three primary buckets. One is efficiencies, right? How do we do things? If we're spending 17 hours on something every week, can we find a way to make it an hour, right? And then those 16 hours, and if it's multiple people, that's a lot of hours and a lot of time, can be directed to areas that really matter, to that human touch. If our students really need someone to sit down with them and walk them through the curriculum, answer their questions, be that really available and present advisor, that's what we want people. As a student, when it comes in and goes, hey, where's the closest bus stop, or where can I buy pizza? AI can do that. You don't need a person to answer that. AI can do it and do it quickly, and can quickly scan across all of our locations and see what's open right now. Can check the menu and go, hey, there's this kind of pizza on place A and this kind of B. Which one do you like? Oh, you've normally picked B. That's your preference. Here's your availability. Would you like us to reserve you a seat? You can keep going, right? So that personalized experience that's automated and fast 24/7, because AI doesn't need time off, doesn't need vacation, doesn't take trips. I'm about to go on a trip with my family, kids' spring break tomorrow for a few days. And I'm looking forward to completely disconnecting from certain things and really being in the present. Because what I think it's important, sometimes we get stuck in trying to do too many things and multitasking, and there's a lot of research that there is no such thing. Because if you're doing too many things at once, and especially if they're different kinds of tasks, the brain processing power needed to switch from one to recalibrate to the other, there's a lot of waste, as opposed to if you would just say, I'm doing X, I'm going to do X for an hour, done. I'm doing now Y for the next hour. I'm going to do that, and so forth. So to come back to the question you said, I try to use it. So there's the efficiencies. I use there all the time. I have ideas, thoughts. So the efficiencies, let's say my email. I get a lot of emails. I'm in a lot of different meetings and calls. We started using certain tools, Copilot and some others, to really, one of my pet peeves is, and those who work with me know this, so if they hear this podcast, they won't be surprised. It's when 7 people have spent 7 weeks discussing a problem, and the email thread is 7 miles long, and then they forward it to me and go, hey, what do you think? What? I don't have time for that. So now using a tool that in 10 seconds can summarize the whole thing, tell me where we are, what's the position, what are the next actionable steps, and what's my role on this journey or in this decision, is a game changer.
Yeah.
So I use it for efficiencies all the time. I try to use it, and we're experimenting this in a small scale. There's a lot of tools coming out now that are trying to optimize your calendar based on cognitive load, based on kinds of work, based on locations. So you're not like, I'm in building A, then I'm in building B, then I'm in building C, then I'm in building A, then I'm back to C. Well, that's just wasteful, right? How do we come up with a way, unless you're really trying to hit your 10,000 steps, I get that. But how do we make it where you're more efficient? Like, let's group all these meetings here together. on similar topic, get them done. Then the next one, let's give you a little bit of a break to do some other things and reflect and actually process and do the work that you assumed in these meetings. So efficiencies, creativity and ideas, already shared that. I have different thoughts and ideas, different things I do and my team and others. And we bounced off ideas all the time and go, hey, how do we do this? What would you do? What's missing? So it's kind of like having that high priced consultant
Yeah.
available and at various moments of the day when you need them with deeply ingrained expertise. And then third is what we try to do is modernize our services. We have done a lot of different things where experience in at work really does not match how we live our lives. And most of us, if we're honest, I mean, some companies are doing this really well, but if we're honest, we work one way and then we live completely differently. Right? You're at home. Like I used to come, I had a conversation with a friend from New York who was a marketing executive, and a number of us were there, and he was saying why people should not buy ads on certain TV shows unless it's embedded in the scene. Unless like, hey, you and I are part of a scene, and I pick up a product, right? Unless it's embedded in the scene. And then this third gentleman was like, well, why not? It makes a lot of sense. He goes, does it really? He goes, yes, cool. All right. So when you're at home, when do you watch what you watch? Short of live sporting events and maybe national political debates. And I don't know why you would do this to yourself with the latter. But if you choose, if you're a glutton for punishment, cool, right? You watch everything on demand when you want to watch it. Whether you go to Netflix or Hulu or Peacock or, name a service, I want to watch that show and I'm going to watch it at 10 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning because that's when I can and I'm available. Okay. And then you want it to follow you, right? You watched it on a TV, then maybe you moved it to your laptop, then maybe you moved it to your phone. You want it to follow and to know where you stopped. And then on top of that all, when an ad comes on, what do? You fast forward it. If you cannot skip the ad, you pick up your other device or you go to the bathroom or kitchen. Tell me again why we should spend millions of dollars on these ads. Then no one's watching. And then you should have seen the amazement on the face of our third friend who goes, I never thought about it that way. He goes, because we live in a particular way, but then we go back to work and it's still a carbon copy, 3 copies, 9 signatures, walk it to different offices. Why are we still doing that? So it's important to be reflective. We tend to romanticize work, the way it's done, the way it's always been done. It's always been roses and peaches and glory in the past. It was always better than it is today. And if you're really honest and reflective, if you were to look at certain environments, perhaps where some of us have worked 5 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, not everything was better than it is today. So embrace where you are, embrace these tools and technologies, have them serve you, not you serving them. That's the differentiator. At some point, I don't have one here because I don't need one, right? Because they're on my phone. But at some point, those big Texas Instrument calculators came out with the quadratic equations and everything else. And the uproar was like, oh, this is going to ruin math and students will never learn and they're going to cheat. And okay, great. Nobody bats an eye today, right?
Yeah.
And we can go down all these things that at one point we're going to ruin everything and everyone. And then fast forward and you go, I can actually use this to my advantage. So let me use it to my advantage. I think that's the same thing that's going to happen with AI. The challenge right now, too many organizations have AI solutions in search of problems. They haven't really identified what they're trying to solve. And then the second side of that coin, not all, but a few AI labeled and branded products and services are not AI. They are at the quality of autocomplete and spell check. And we've had those for a while.
And this has always been the case with every technology revolution, whether it was cloud first time around or
Yes.
something as a service, whatever it was, it's whatever's the cool thing at the moment. And it comes from maybe a good place, but it's like if our product, if our service doesn't mention cloud, doesn't mention this in this way, then consumers or potential users won't look on it favorably. It will give the impression that we are behind the curve. So there is almost by necessity, some might argue, a need to jump onto that train. I could chat all day. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time, Milos. But before we go, some questions that we ask to all of our guests. This show is called CXO Secrets. So what is your secret? If you put your modesty to a side for a moment, tell us what key attribute you believe has enabled you to achieve what you have.
I was told by many people that I'm quite effective in inspiring others to reach their full potential. But to me, the attribute that I believe helped me the most to achieve what I have achieved so far, and I'm not done yet, is courage. I am not afraid to say what others are thinking. Now that comes with a dose of salt, if you will. Doesn't always work out. It's not always well received and welcome, depending on what team you are and who's your boss and how you structure it and so forth. But my whole life, my entire career, I've been in places where we have a prep for a meeting with maybe an executive team or a major partner, and the four of us are talking, and we all say, hey, we got to talk about X. Like, X makes no sense. We looked at the contract, we looked at the proposal, we look at the plan. Makes no sense. Meeting shows up, and now it's the CEO or the president, the chief operating officer or CFO in the room, and 3 out of 4 of us say nothing. I've always had the courage, respectfully, professionally, to call a spade a spade. Didn't always work. Sometimes it ends up meaning that you're not invited to the next meeting because you're challenging status quo. You're asking too many challenging questions that they don't want to discuss at that moment in time. But having the courage to be honest with who you are, to remain true to yourself, and bring your full self in every engagement, I think it would be the superpower. It's having the courage to say what you really, truly think.
Say it as you see it. And that's certainly what you've done in our conversation today. And I thank you very much for that. We also do a Pass the Question here on this show, where you get to put a question to a future guest, whoever they may be. First, though, previous guest, Luis Suarez, who is CTO at HIG Capital, has this question for you.
You know, I always ask people, what are they most proud of in their career? And the reason is, it's always going to surprise you what they answer. It sometimes may not be related to their current role, or it might not even be related to their actual industry, but something they've been involved with to it. And that gives you insight into who the person is.
Great question, Luis. What I'm proudest of is developing new leaders. I am very proud to see amazing women and men who I've met maybe 15 or 20 years ago in entry-level positions where they were plugging cables in with me under people's desks and delivering boxes, who are now senior executives in major corporations and universities across the nation. Mm-hmm. And they did the work, but often they tell me that I ignited the spark. So inspiring people to go beyond their self-imposed limiting beliefs and strive and reach for the next level of impact and value is probably what I'm the most proud of.
Very, very fulfilling indeed. Great to hear that. Finally, what question would you like me to put to a guest on a future episode of the show?
What is that one thing that you keep delaying and postponing, and you keep telling yourself that you're going to do next year, or in 2 years, or when you find the next job, or when you retire? What is that one thing that you really want to accomplish, but you've been finding excuses for years not to do?
True to your word, Milos. Always asking the difficult questions. I look forward to asking that one on a future episode of the show. But for now, Milos Topic, thank you so much for joining us here on CXO Secrets.
Thank you, David.